Hi everyone, welcome to a new tutorial. My name is Atenas and this is Mode Bespoke. For today's project, we're going to be working on these Tunisian crochet socks. So we're going to be using all of the skills that you guys learned in that very first Tunisian Crochet 101 class. So let's get started. Okay, so here are some samples of what the socks will look like when you're done. For this tutorial, we're going to make the adult size, but this is just a standard one-size-fits-all adult. If you have really small feet, or you need a bigger size, or you want to make baby socks, or for small children, I will show you at the end of the video how to resize it. It is really easy to resize these socks, so wait to the end of the video. We'll talk about resizing and different yarn options in case you want to use a sock yarn instead of a worsted number 4 yarn. So the way we are going to set up this sock is like this. We're going to begin with the elastic that's at the top of the sock, and we begin with our chain down here. And every row we're going to add some width to it. So when you sew it closed, this is going to be the top part of your sock, the part that you fold over. So that is because in this direction, our crochet is really stretchy, but if we go this way, it's not as stretchy. So we need it to be stretchy around so that it fits our calf, our ankle, or however high you want this section to be. Then we're going to follow it up by making the actual body of the sock. Get to the toes, then the bottom part, and then I'll show you here how to work the heel, which is just a repetition of this section. And all you have left to do after that is just to sew it closed. So let's get started. Okay, so here is our elastic. We're going to begin with this bottom part, which is going to be our chain 20. Now, if you want this to be taller, so if you want a sock that goes higher up on your leg, so if you want it to go up to your knee or however high you want, you're going to make a longer chain. So for the adult one, I'm just going to start with a chain of 20, and then we're going to work our way up. We're going to use 2 stitches for this entire project. We're going to use the purl and we're going to use the knit. If you don't know how to crochet those, look up here on the video. I'm going to link the beginner tutorial, which is where I show you step by step how to do both of these stitches. So practice those and then come back to this tutorial because we're not going to review how to make those stitches. So that way we can move through this whole tutorial a little quickly. So let's get started with that. So for this pair of socks, I'm just going to use a number 4 worsted yarn. You can use any size you want, but I'm using a size 4. And then I'm using a 6mm Tunisian hook. This has to be a Tunisian hook. If you do not have one, you can go check out the shop. I'll put the link in the description box below, and you can find a variety of Tunisian hooks there. So 6mm hook, size 4 yarn. You're going to start with a slip knot, and we're going to chain 20. If you want a taller sock, so if you want it to go higher up on your leg, make a longer chain. Start with a chain 20. So once you've completed your chain, we're going to start working in the very next stitch. So skip the first one, go into the second one, and we're going to start casting on. So if you remember to cast on, you insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop, and that's it. Go to the next stitch, cast on, and so forth until you complete the whole row. The elastic part of our sock is just going to be a repetition of 2 rows. So we're going to do the purl row and then we're going to do the knit row. Both of our rows are going to have a return pass. The return pass is handled the same way no matter what row you're on. So to complete the return pass, you're going to yarn over and pull through 1 loop. And then you're going to yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and so forth until you finish the row. You're going to be left with just 1 loop on your hook. Again, if any of this is new to you, go check out that beginner tutorial where we go through this step by step, and that way you'll be able to follow along a lot more easily. All right, so our first row is going to be a row of purl. So we're going to skip this first stitch, we're going to go into that second one, and we're going to reverse yarn over, hold the thread down with your index finger, insert your hook into the stitch, and then you can release your yarn over, and complete your stitch. So that is a purl stitch. We're going to work 1 purl stitch into every stitch of the row. So once you get to the end stitch, the very last one, it's going to look like this. So you're going to have two chains. You're going to have this top one and the one here on the side. Insert your hook onto this one. So you're going to purl that one as well. So do your reverse yarn over and everything. When you insert your hook, make sure you get both threads of that yarn. So we got this front one and this back one. Make sure you get both of them and then complete your purl. So you're going to complete a return pass, just a regular one. So yarn over, pull through one, and then yarn over, pull through two until you have one loop left on your hook. There you go. The next row is going to be a knit row. So you're going to skip the first stitch, go into the second one, and remember that your knit row, you're going to work in between this stitch. So if you look at your stitch this way, you're going to see these vertical lines. Turn it to the side and you're going to see that there is a front loop and a back loop. So go right in between both of those. So just insert your hook, go through the back, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So you're going to do that for every stitch of the row. When you get to this last stitch, you're going to have to twist this a little bit. You're going to see this top loop and the side loop. Go into this last stitch and just knit stitch. Go. And then you just complete a return pass. So if you can hear that little sound, it's the hook hitting the table. I'm sorry. All right, so there you go. And that's it. That's all there is to do for the elastic band. So now all you do is just repeat your purl stitch and then knit stitch, purl, knit. So here we've completed 2 rows, 1 purl, 1 knit. So 1, 2. You need a total of 36 rows for the adult sock. So what I find it easier to do is just to count the purl stitches. Just makes it easier for me. And in that case, you'll only need 18. So count 18 rows. So see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth until you have your 18. Or you can count row by row. So here's 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5 until you have 36. So once you've completed the length you need, you're going to end on a purl row. So here's my purl row. This is row number 18. So it's purl row number 18 or row number 36 if you're counting row by row. So to bind off, we're going to do a slip stitch bind off. So you're going to insert your hook into that second stitch just like you would if you were doing a knit stitch. So insert your hook right between both threads of the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. But now you're going to slip stitch. So you're going to pull this front loop through this loop over here, this back loop. So like so. We're going to do the same in the next stitch. So insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then pull this top loop through this bottom loop. And you're going to do this in every stitch of your row. So what that's going to do is it's going to close off all of the spaces up at the top of our stitching. So here, let me complete this other one and I'll show you what it looks like. So here we haven't done a bind off yet, so it leaves this big space. But here, once you've completed the bind off, it closes up that space. So just go through and finish crocheting a slip stitch for every stitch of the row, and then we can start to weave in the ends and move on to the body of the sock. So when you get to this last stitch, you're also going to slip stitch. So just insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, and slip stitch. Now what I like to do here is a chain 1, because this will make a little knot once you tighten it, and then leave a nice long tail end of yarn because we're going to be weaving that in. So my scissors, cut that off, and you're going to pull your hook out, you're going to pull your thread out, go, tighten that up, and there you go. So just go through, weave in your ends. If you don't know how, I'll leave the link to a tutorial up here on the screen. That way you can go through weaving your ends, and then we'll move on to the next part. All right, so for this next part, you're going to need 2 stitch markers. If you don't have stitch markers, you can use bobby pins, safety pins, or just 2 little scraps of yarn. And you're going to turn your work around. So here's the front. You turn it so that we're looking at the back. You're going to fold it into thirds. So fold it in this way and then this way. And try to get your fold right in the middle. Like so. So now grab one of your stitch markers and you're going to go into this stitch right here. So go into the centermost stitch. Just place your stitch marker there. And then do the same on this other side. So that's going to tell us when we open it how far we have to crochet to start the body of the sock. So that's how we're going to work. So as you crochet along, so as we cast on, there we go, I lost my word. As you cast on, we're going to count the number of stitches so that when we do our second sock, we have the same number of stitches going across. Okay, so let's cast on. But before we do, let me just point out that if you have wider feet, so you need to make a wider sock, this is a good time to move your stitch over a little bit towards the outside. So this will make your sock wider. If you're not sure, if this is for you and you're not sure if it's going to fit, just put your foot on top, right up here. I know you don't have this top part, but put your foot right here and make sure that it fits in between both of these stitch markers. So if you need to add width, just move your stitch markers out a little bit more, and that will make a wider sock. We are going to make this double, so this is the top part, and then we're going to make the bottom part so that when we fold it over, you have a completed sock. So if you want to make it wider just in case, now would be the time to move your stitch markers. Alright, so let's get to casting on here. So you're going to insert your hook into the stitch with your stitch marker. Going to wrap the yarn around your hook, leave a nice long tail. We're going to weave that in later. And then pull that through. And now with the working yarn, so drop the tail, you're going to chain 1. So yarn over and chain. Now you can tighten this stitch right here. Now you're going to cast on. So you're going to pull up a loop in every one of the stitches. So if you notice between the purl stitches, there are 2 stitches. Here's one and here's the other one. So we went on to 1, so we're going to do 1 and count your stitches as you go, okay, so that you know how many stitches you're working across, and you make that same amount for your second sock so your 2 socks match. Okay, so here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then just keep going until you get across. For an adult sock, I went across 19 stitches, so that's what you're going to see on the written pattern. So it was 19 stitches from this stitch marker to this one. Okay, so now that we've cast on, we're just going to work a return pass. So make sure that you did count your stitches before completing your return pass. So it's just yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2, pull through 2, until you complete the row. Alright, so once you have finished and you've completed your return pass, now we're going to crochet the rest of the body of the sock in knit stitch. So all of this section is completed in knit stitch. You don't have to purl anymore. So the only thing that we're going to have to pay attention to is up here, the toe part. We're going to do decreases, but we'll get to those here in a minute. So you're just going to knit stitch. For the adult sock, I completed 32 rows, and that's before I got to the toe part. So this purple section would be 32 rows. So if you are just doing custom size or you're doing it for kids, just count the number of rows that you need. Again, we'll go through at the end of the video how to adjust it, but make sure you count how many rows you did so that it matches your second sock. So if you're adjusting it, making it a little smaller, whatever it is, count your stitches, or not your stitches, your rows. Okay, so zoom in here and I'll do this bit of the first row with you guys. So remember that you're going to always skip the first stitch. You're going to start on the second one. You're going to insert your hook in between both threads of the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And that's it. That's all there is to the knit stitch. So just go through, knit stitch in every stitch of the row, including this last stitch, and then you work your return pass. And then knit stitch the next row, return pass, and so forth until you complete 32 rows. Alright, so once you've completed your 32 rows, we're going to be working this middle section. Now, you're going to need to work this 2 times. You're going to do one for the toe, so if you fold it, one for the toe, and then you're going to repeat it again for the heel. So it's the exact same thing for both sides. So I'm just going to show you here with the heel since it's the same thing. Now, if you want to switch color, this is the easiest place to switch color. If you don't, you can just keep working this with the same color yarn, especially if you're using like a sock yarn that is a color changing sock yarn, then you can just keep working this the same. But for us that are switching color, you've already completed your return pass for row 32. So now what you're going to do is you're going to pull up a loop in your new color. Remember to leave a nice long tail end of yarn. So wrap it around your hook. And you're going to pull this loop through the purple loop. So the tan through the purple. And you just tighten up the purple yarn. So I've already cut it, but cut a nice long tail end of yarn. Pull that nice, pull that nice and tight. We're going to drop that tail end, and we're going to work with just the working yarn. So you're going to pull up another row of knit stitch. So pull up 1 stitch per every stitch of the row. So remember to skip that first stitch and then just pull up a loop for every one of the stitches of the row. We're not going to start our decreases until our return pass. So pull up a loop for every stitch, and I'll see you again in a moment. All right, so we've completed the row, so we've cast on our knit stitches, and now here's where we're going to do all of our decreases. So our decreases are going to be the same for a total of 6 rows, and this is if you're completing the adult sock. So you're going to yarn over, and we're going to pull through 2. So instead of your normal yarn over, pull through 1, it's yarn over, pull through 2. So there's 1, 2, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over 2, yarn over 2, until you get to the end of the row. At the end of the row, we're going to yarn over and pull through 3. So I'm almost there. There we go. Let me move my yarn over. Let's get this out of the way. All right. So see, we have 3 loops on our hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. There you go. So that's how we're going to handle decreases. You're going to decrease for a total of 6 rows. So now when you start the row, you're going to skip 2 stitches. So it's where you had your decrease. So here's the first one you normally would have skipped. You're going to skip this second one, and we're going to do our first knit stitch on the 3rd stitch of the row. So here we go. And that's just so we make a slightly more dramatic decrease. So I'll just angle in a little bit quicker. All right. So we've pulled up a loop for all of our stitches until we get here to the end. So now at the end, you're going to notice a little bit of a triangle. So you're going to have 1 slanted stitch, which is the last one, and then this one right next to it. Skip this middle stitch. Go directly to the last stitch of the row. And you're just going to pull up a loop on that last stitch. Here we go. And now we complete a return pass with a decrease. So yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, pull through 2, 2, 2, until you get to the end. And at the end, we're going to yarn over and pull through 3. So here we are. So you have your last 3 loops, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. So let's start this again. We're going to skip the first stitch and the second stitch, and we're going to work a knit stitch into the 3rd stitch, and then just pull up a loop. So we knit stitch all the way across till we get here towards the end, and at the end we're going to have this stitch, and then we're going to have the last stitch of the row, which is going to be diagonal. Skip this one. So the second to last stitch, we're going to skip it and go into the diagonal stitch, pull up a loop. And now we're going to start our return pass with a decrease. So yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over 2, yarn over 2, yarn over 2, until you get to the end of the row. And we're going to do yarn over, pull through 3. So there we go. And that's how you're going to do your decreases. Now here we've completed 3 rows, and you know because you've got 1, 2, 3. If you're working with the same color yarn and you can't tell where your diagonal starts, probably should have mentioned this then. When you started the decreases, you can use just a stitch marker or something to let you know where the beginning is, so you can count your 3 rows. You're going to need a total of 6. So complete 3 more rows of decreases, and then we're going to start to increase. So let me complete these remaining 3 rows, and I'll see you again in a moment. So once you've completed your 6 rows of decreases for the adult sock, now you have to do the rows of increases. So if you did an adult sock and you did 6 rows of decreases, you need 6 rows of increases. So the increases is what I think is the trickiest part of this entire pattern. So let's do this nice and slowly. So we're going to look at this first stitch right here. So remember that you always skip the very, very first one. So here's the second one. It's got both strands, so both threads, for that first stitch. You're going to insert your hook behind that first one. So it's the one that's in the back. So just push it forward, insert your hook behind it, and pull it up like that. And now just yarn over and pull up a loop. And now, here's that thread you just went behind. Here's the other one. You're going to insert your hook in between both of those threads, so into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. And now you have increased by 1 stitch. So now go to the end. So yarn over, here we go. Get to this last stitch. Okay. Now on this last stitch, it's got these threads, so it's got the ones when you look at it on the side, so it's got both sides, but when you look at it, it's facing you, your work is facing you, you're going to see this thread right here. That is where you're going to insert your hook. So make sure you go behind it and pull up the stitch like that. And now you're going to yarn over, pull up a loop. This is the hardest one, I think, out of all of them. So this last stitch on every row. Now you're going to insert your hook between that stitch and that very last stitch. There we go. Yarn over and pull up a loop. And there you go. So now, my stomach is growling. So now we have increased. So you've added a stitch on this side and you've added one on this side. Okay, so now you're going to complete a return pass, and this is just a regular return pass, just like what you completed down here in this purple section. So you just yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, until you complete the row. So we'll do 1 more row of increases, and then I'll leave you to complete the remaining rows. Okay, so here we go again. So you're going to look at that second stitch. This one's going to be a little bit funky here. So there it is. You're going to insert your hook into that back loop, so right behind it. So there you go. And now you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. Now you're going to go into the stitch. So here's that loop you pulled through. Here's the front loop. Insert your hook in between both of those threads. Yarn over and pull up a loop. And now you're just going to knit stitch in the remaining stitches till you get to that very last one. Okay, we get to this last one, and here's that back thread. Insert your hook through that stitch or right behind it, yarn over and pull up a loop. And now you're going to insert your hook in between that stitch that you just worked and the very last stitch of the row. So those last 2 loops like that, yarn over and pull up that loop. And then just complete a regular return pass. So if you're working the adult sock and you worked six rows of decreases, you need to complete 6 rows of increases. So if you lose count remember that you can count right here. So you've got 1, 2. We've completed 2 rows. We need to complete 6. You can also count the number of stitches up here. So just make sure it matches what you have down here. So if, when you were working down here, if you're working the adult sock, it was, you cast on 19 stitches plus the very first one. So if you go through and count all the loops on your hook, it would have been 20. You're going to need to have the same number, and that tells you you're on that last row. So complete the remaining rows. I'll see you here at the end. So once you have completed that final row, so row number 6, if you need to switch colors, this is the time to do so again. So just to repeat on a color switch, there we go, let me get that out of the way. You're going to complete your return pass, and then you're going to make a loop with the color you're switching to. You're going to pass that loop through the bottom loop, like so. Pull on this bottom yarn to tighten your loop, and now all you have to do is just cast on a knit stitch for every stitch of the row. So remember, you always skip the first one, and we're going to go into the second one, and you just cast on a knit stitch all the way across. So as you are knitting along, count the number of stitches you're pulling up, and make sure that this number matches the number of stitches you did on this bottom part. So you want these two to be even. So make sure you cast the right number of stitches. It might look a little bit wider, so when you look at it like this top part looks wider. That's the way it's going to look. Once you cast on your first stitches and complete your first return pass, it will close up a little bit more like this. So just make sure you completed the right number of rows. So if it was 6 down here, it'll be 6 up here. So go through, complete that, and now what you're going to do is just another repetition of that purple section we did, so that your work, let me get all of this out of the way, is going to look like this when you're done. So we've done this section, and then you did the middle part for the toes, and you're going to do this center section, which is exactly the same as this. So again, just make sure that you, when you cast on, after you did that color switch up here, make sure that you counted your stitches. So we do this repetition, and then we repeat what we did for the toes. So you're going to do that again here at the side. So that's what it's going to look like before you're ready to sew. So what do you do now? You've gotten to this point. What do we do now? So here is that last stitch. So you're going to cut a nice long tail end of yarn here. So remember, I like to do a chain 1, which I haven't done yet. So let me get that chain 1 here, just so I have that little knot at the end of the row. So chain 1, there we go. And now we just cut our yarn. So leave a nice tail end. And you're going to pull your hook out along with your thread, and then we'll be ready to sew. So before we sew our sock closed, go through and weave in all of these ends. So it will make your life so much easier. So let me go weave all of this in. I'll see you again in a moment, and I'll show you how to sew this closed. So once you've completed everything, you've woven in your ends, and you're ready to sew, here's what we're going to do. The easiest way I have found to begin this is to start with the elastic. So grab your sock. This is going to be the outside of your sock. So we're going to flip it this way. So here's the inside. And you are going to need your yarn or tapestry needle and a long thread of yarn. So what I do is I just loop it through like this. So there you go, it's in my needle, and then I'm going to make a nice big knot at the end. So get that nice and knotted. We're going to start here at the end. So you're just going to go on this topmost stitch, insert your needle, and then go all the way through. Go. And now we're going to fold it in half. And this is how I'm going to sew all of my sock. So if you prefer a different stitch, use whatever stitch you want, but this is the one I use. So you're going to line up your two edges, and then I'm just going to sew here at the topmost stitch on this side, just to close this up. Go. All right, let me see if I can zoom in here so you can see. So there are different stitches here. So you see this braided part up here? That's the top of the stitch. We're going to work here on the side. And right next to all of these stitches, see, you can tell where the stitches are. I'm going to work here. So I'm just going to insert my needle into one stitch. So notice I'm going all the way across. And now here's the other side. Now the other side, you see the stitch right here. So as you're working along, you're going to notice each of these threads, right above it there's a stitch. So I'm going to get both loops, so both threads right here, like that. So see there's a little V? I'm going to insert my needle there and pull that through. And I'm going to go back to this first side. And where my needle came out, so you see the thread, so where my stitch came out on this side the last time, I'm going to insert my needle, I'm going to go into the stitch right next to it. So I'm going to go all the way through. There we go. Now I'm going to go on to this side. I'm going to look for that other V and then just sew there. So there we go. And then we're going to do this side. So where that thread came out, insert your needle there and then go through to the other side. And that's it. So that's how I'm going to sew this across. Again, you can use any stitch you want, doesn't matter. This is your sock. If it's easier for you to just pop this onto a sewing machine and sew it closed, you can do that too. But however you sew it, it'll look gorgeous no matter what. So go through, sew all of this top elastic band across. So just go all the way down till you get here to the bottom side. And then I will see you when we are, I guess, both there. So pause the video if you need to. I'll see you again in a moment. Okay, so we are at the end. I'm just going to give this a nice good stitch here just to make sure it is properly stitched closed. Go. And there you go. So that's what it looks like here on the outside. And when you fold it over this way, there you go. Okay, so now that our elastic is done, here's this next part. So these little triangles, so I'm just going to explain this part first and then we're going to go through and sew it. These little triangles, we're going to sew closed like that. So we're going to sew them on the top side. That's what they're going to look like when you sew these. You're going to do the same here for the heel. What that's going to do is create this nice little round area right here, which is where your heel goes. So for the toe, it just sews it closed like this. Okay, so I think it is easier to just place this, make sure that this is centered. So this is where you just stitched. Center your seam and then center the heel right there. And this is where we're going to start sewing. I normally just go through and sew my way around, and then this I fold it as I go along. If it is easier for you to sew these closed beforehand, then you can just sew this shut like this, do the same on the other side, and then you're going to sew these like that. So if that makes it a little easier for you. I think it's just easier to sew through, so I mean it's up to you. So what you're going to do is just make sure that you have the center stitch, and then I'm just going to give it one quick stitch here. Try to keep the stitch in the back since it is a different color yarn. If it's the same color, it doesn't matter, but here I'm going to go through one of these back stitches just to get that first stitch in. Okay, go. And I'm going to use the same stitch that I used up here on this side. So for this one, you've got clear stitches, so I'm just going to go in on one stitch like so, go all the way through. I'm going to pull on this tightly as I stitch along, okay? So pull that tightly. You're going to pick a stitch up here. So I'm going to go in this one and just go through and pull that tightly. And I'm going to go right into that same stitch. So if you look closely, here's the thread that we're using to sew. So it's right there. I'm going to insert my needle into that same stitch and pull it out through the stitch right next to it. And there we go. And I'm just going to go sewing along the end of the sock in the same way. So I'll get all the way across. There we go. I'm going to get here to this corner part, and then I'll show you how to sew this bit, and then I'll leave you to sew the rest of your sock. So let me keep sewing this. I'll see you again here in just a moment. Okay, so I've gotten across, and what I do here, I just insert my needle and go all the way to the center part. So if you have a different color, it's easier for you to just go here through the back so that your thread isn't visible. You can just do that. There we go. So here we are at the end, and I'm going to stitch this the same way that I've stitched all of this. So I'm going to go through one stitch. So I'm going to go through this right here. Oh, untangled. Go through this stitch here on one side. Pull this nice and tight. If you pull it nice and tight, you can't see the purple thread. So nice and tight. And go to the other side. Nice and tight. Go to this side. Nice and tight. So we are almost done here. When you get to the end, just join the two little corners. Make sure you stitch through that. There we go, so that is closed. And now you're going to sew this part down to here. So just work on the same area where you were earlier, so just so that it overlaps, and make sure that you close any of the spacing you have. There we go. And here you go. You're all set up. So just sew along the side, sew here. I'll see you when I get to this point, and then I'll just show you how I hide my thread. So sew along up to here. I'll see you here in just a second. So here I'm at the end. Finished sewing all of this across, and now we're here. So I've got this last stitch here to make. So I'll go through and close that up. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to insert my needle right here, turn this around, pull through, make sure that you pull this nice and tight, and then I'm just going to make one long stitch all the way across. So that way it will hide my string, so it'll hide all of this yarn, keep it out of the way, and then it'll be ready for me to start again on this side. There we go, and I'm ready to go again. So then I'll just sew all the way along here, do this other heel, so do this little triangle part the same way I did this side, and close this off, and that's it. So there we go, I've completely sewed up my sock. Now I just have to go through and weave in my ends, and we can start talking about resizing and using a different size yarn. So let me finish this up, and then I will show you how to resize. Okay, so let's talk about resizing. I've got bunch of mess here, but we're going to need all of this so I can show you what we're going to do. We're going to start with yarn size. So let me scooch on over. So if you're going to want to use a sock yarn is a size 1 fingering yarn usually. So this is quite a thin yarn. We used a size 4, so this is a worsted yarn. There's quite a bit of a size difference if you look at them. So other options you can use is a sport yarn, which is a size 2. So it's just a little bit bigger than this one, or a DK yarn, which is a 3, and it's just a little bit smaller than this. Now, if you use a size 1 or 2 yarn, you're going to need a 3mm hook. That's for this. If you're using a size 3 or 4 yarn, you're going to need a 6mm hook. So this one. So as you can see, there's quite a size difference, but that's because the yarns are very different sizes. So that's what I would recommend. If you're an experienced crocheter and you just kind of want to play around with different sizes, then go ahead. But that's just kind of what I use as a guide, just 3 and a 6. Now let's talk about the measurements. So if you are resizing, you're using a sock yarn, you're really going to need to resize this because it's going to be a different number of rows and a different number of stitches. So let's start with the 4 measurements you're going to need to make these socks. The first measurement that you need to take is from the top of your heel to however high you want the sock to go. So if you want it to be an ankle sock, you just measure from the top of your heel to the ankle. If you want it to go mid-calf, or if you want it to go below or above your knee. So that's the first measurement. What that measurement's going to be is the number of chains that we started with. So if you remember at the beginning of the video, I started with chain 20. That's the measurement from here to here. So if you're using a different size yarn or you want it higher, whatever it is, start to chain and then just hold it up against your measuring tape as you crochet along until you hit the length that you need, and then jot down the number of stitches. So for me it was 20, for you it might be 30, 40, or maybe just 5. Jot that down. You're going to need that for your second sock. So the number of chains, that was the 1. Your second measurement is going to be around the widest part of your leg. So if this is going to your mid-calf, you're going to need to measure around that part. So maybe like that. So however wide it is around the widest part of your leg, wherever it is you want the sock to be. That's the second measurement. What that's going to be, when you look at your pattern, is going to be the number of rows we crocheted. So all of this is that measurement. So remember that this does stretch. So if you want it to be a little bit tighter, you can maybe make it not as long. I like my socks to fit really comfortably, so I use that exact length. So if it's 8 inches across, then this is going to be 8 inches from here to here. So there's that. Now the third measurement you need is from here to here. So use the widest part of your foot. So if it's right here, if it's a little bit higher, wherever it is, use the widest part of your foot. That is the third measurement. That's going to be this measurement right here. So if you remember when we used our little stitch markers that we folded our sock this way, so that's just the guide. So when you fold your sock like that and we put our stitch markers, that was just a guide to see how wide across we needed it. Now if you have a more narrow foot or you have a wider feet, this is where you're going to adjust it. So let me get my measuring tape, it's all tangled up. So if you needed, like 4 inches across, or I don't know, 3 inches across, whatever that was, that measurement, measure between your stitch markers. So go from one stitch marker to the next and make sure it's the same measurement. So if you want your sock to fit a little more comfortably, because this doesn't have a lot of stretch, so this part here doesn't stretch much. It stretches this way, but it doesn't stretch this way. So make sure you add a little bit extra if you want your sock to fit comfortably. So for this one, it was what? Right here was 3 inches. I made this a little bit wider, and I just went with 4. That's why I just used whatever measurement it was here. So whatever half of this was, that's why my stitch markers are where they are. So that's where I found it is the best, the easiest measurement for me. But again, if you need to make it wider, narrower, this is where you do that. So that was measurement number 3. Measurement number 4 is from the highest part of your foot, whether it's this toe or this one, whichever one it is. Measure from that one to the heel. So you need this measurement. That one is a measurement you're going to use for this section. So from here to here. So if this was, let's go with 4 inches. Then from here to here, you need to crochet this 4 inches. Your decreases and increases are separate. That's apart. So that's just a little added extra so you have a little more space. But from here to here, that is the measurement from here to here. Okay? Now with your decreases, before I move along, if you are making, because these are little kid socks, but if you are making children's socks, so up to maybe a 5-year-old, so from newborn, so just tiny baby socks to 5-year-old, this part right here, if you remember, we crocheted 6 rows of decreases and then 6 rows of increases. For newborn to 5-year-old, just do 5. So 5 rows of increases, decreases, and then 5 of increases. Otherwise you'll end up with a pointier sock. But that's for children. From 6-year-olds to adults, then go with the 6 rows. And that way you have a more smooth toe area. So here, I didn't even fold that right. There we go. So here's the top. So that it's a little bit rounder. So that's 6 for adults. So anywhere 6-year-olds to adult, go with 6 rows. Anyone younger than that, go with 5. Okay, so those are all the measurements you need for that. It's really quite easy to resize. It seems like a lot, but those are only 4 measurements you need. Just measure it as you crochet along. Remember to count the number of rows. So from your initial chain, that's 1. You need the number of rows you crocheted, that's 2. The number of stitches across, so from here to here, and then how many rows you crocheted from here to here. You need to write those down next to your measurements so you know that your second sock will be the same. So you have the same number of stitches from here to here, the same number of rows around, and all of that. So just make sure you write all of it down, and then it's really easy to do. If you need help with it, I'm always happy to help. Just leave your questions down in the comment section below. You can also email me. That's fine too. If you have left me a question, check. I do respond to everybody. So normally I respond really quickly. I respond that same day most of the time, unless I'm out of town or something. But most of the time I respond that same day. If not, maybe within an hour of when you left your comment. So just check your comment. I have left a response. But there you go. That's how you do it. So that was our video tutorial for today, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe. I post videos every week. If you haven't had a chance to stop by the website, go check it out. I do post all of the patterns up on the site. You can purchase the PDF patterns directly from the website, and they are instant downloads, so you can have that pattern immediately. You can also download it as many times as you want. If you haven't checked out my Instagram, go check that out as well. I post I post photos of all of the patterns that I have worked on, as well as pictures of projects that we're going to be working on here on the channel. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to give it a like if you've enjoyed this video tutorial. I'll see you all again next week.